Testing, 1, 2, 3. Hello.
Morning. صباح الخير جميعا، أهلا وسهلا فيكم. أنا يزن حجازي. It's a pleasure to be moderating and getting to know the wonderful speakers we have today. We're going to go for around 50 minutes, and we would like to have at least 10 minutes of your questions. We intend to cover a lot of ground. So, without further ado, I'd like to just welcome the guests, Mr. Hadi, Mr. Elie, Mohab, and Abdulrahman. Ahla wa sahla fikum. Thank you for visiting us in Jordan in the Dead Sea, and looking forward to a engaging discussion. So the topic of our session today is incubators, whether they are in universities or in the corporate world, and the VC's perspective on that. Right? I mean, why do we incubate? We incubate to create value. So obviously VCs have a vested interest in that. So we will be exploring this kind of dimension. So I would like to start with an open-ended question for each of you to kind of contribute. And then we'll pick up some threads. So this is not a scripted kind of conversation. We're going to flow. If we see an interesting rabbit, we're going to follow it. Okay? So first question is, when we think about university and corporate incubators, what are the differences between them? To be more specific, what are the differences in terms of objectives, outcomes, measures of success, and their role within the entrepreneurial ecosystem? And then the second part is, how does a VC view them? So what is the difference between a university and corporate incubator? Pick any dimension you would like. And how does a VC kind of view them? I'd like to start with Mr. Elie.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, hi everybody. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. We're the first one, so everybody's so like gaining their energy in the morning. I'm Elie Habib. I'm a corporate VC expert, and I have been doing VC work. I'm from the technology sector forever, actually, and been doing VC work since 2009 in the region here. And this was really the early stage of VC in the region. And now I help corporates set up VC initiatives that are usually part of the innovation strategy and digital transformation that corporates adopt and deploy over many years. And so when I look at the overall innovation strategy of corporate, it has a lot of internal transformation that need to happen, and there are a lot of tie-in into external innovation. External innovations are related to what everybody's here for, in startups, entrepreneurs, disruptive ideas, disruptive execution. And the corporates play a major role in that maturity cycle. And corporates in general, as you all know, will eventually be disrupted themselves by innovation if they are not embracing innovation in the first place and looking at it as an opportunity to reinvent themselves. And I'm sure we will talk a lot about internal transformation at the corporate to allow for that innovation to take place and to be part of the DNA of the company and the culture. But what we also look at is, how do we bring external innovation into the corporate world? And there are multiple mechanisms to do that. And usually also it really follows the maturity cycle of the innovation within the company. So, you know, you cannot descend on a corporate and say, start investing in these startups, start doing proof of concepts together and integrate them inside when they are not ready. They have to be ready to really have that discussion with the startups, because obviously there are multiple differences in terms of the scale, in terms of the time the time dimension in and by itself is completely off between the two entities. And because, you know, startups have very little resources and corporates have a lot of resources. And what we have to be careful is corporates don't completely step over the startup and, you know, in their quest to work with them, choke them. And so there are a lot of these interfaces that we have to help the corporates work with. And I believe that incubators in general, and, you know, Hadi will talk about it some more, is that incubators are a mechanism to allow, at least initially, corporates to learn how to interface and how to interact with startups and understand what does it mean to them internally, and potentially adopt a strategy of how to handle the startups. Do we acquire them? Do we invest in them? Do we work on a business development? Do we do partnerships with them? Is this something, this sector versus this sector? And ultimately, that cycle will lead on to a much more sophisticated corporate innovation that includes potential M&A and acquisition of the startups, which I believe in the region here is very much the last, one of the last links that need to happen to complete the ecosystems. Because ultimately, if we look at the Western world, corporates are the biggest buyers. They provide the biggest exits for startups. And to get to that level of sophistication, there's a lot of change and transformation that has to take place. And incubators play a role in that.
Fantastic. So I love the notion of new interfaces. Yes, you're doing something new and you need to interface with different entities. And what does that interface look like? How can we help corporates manage that relationship is something that,
absolutely,
that is very important. Abdulrahman, I'd like to get your perspective as well. You manage an incubator as part of KAUS called TAQADAM. You're also an angel investor and you are part of AQAL's angel network. So could you please briefly give us your perspective on university corporate incubators?
Yeah, and I mean, that's something I think about a lot because I've become a little bit more self-aware, you know, as my personal preferences, you know, when you're wearing the angel hat versus the university hat. I mean, I think it's the biggest change is a bias, right? We have to be honest that as a corporate or a university, I'll primarily focus on the university part. We have expertise here that can better speak to the corporate part. We will have disadvantages because, you know, there's bureaucracy, there's different levels in order to access all of those resources. And we also have a different agenda, right? And it's important to be upfront with founders early on that this is not just a profit-seeking motive. We also have these other objectives that we want to achieve that can be helpful as a focusing mechanism to attract the right founders and to also make sure that they understand where you're coming from. So for example, in KAUS, our main mandate is economic development. It's not just about investing in the best company who will raise at really great valuations. That's obviously important for the sustainability of the company, and that's important for those jobs to remain. But if a company isn't going to be creating jobs in KSA, then suddenly that doesn't really quite fit with our broader mandate. So it changes the way we design the program. It changes the way we select the companies that are participating. And in our case, we've got two things. We've got an accelerator program for companies in the seed to Series A level, both local in Saudi and regional who are expanding to Saudi, because that's what we know, that's what we can add value to. And we have a deep tech soft landing program for more mature companies that want to expand to Saudi. So Those get benefits in terms of access to the labs, in terms of access to resources. Founders get access to a good network, a community that they can support, and we make sure that that's all delivered to the standard that a founder would expect, because it's very competitive now, to a VC, that a VC would expect, that they select really good founders, and we can guarantee that deal flow we get from here is worth looking at. So it just affects a little bit what we look at in terms of fit. Will the startup benefit more than the others from KAUST as a whole and our network? And I think that's the biggest change, that's the biggest bias that I think is helpful, because it means that founders who would not get looked at elsewhere will actually get a better look and might get more attention from us. So founders have multiple options. And that I think is healthy. So if a founder is deep tech and they want support, they might not find it readily available in the region. And the fact that this one avenue is here to support them, I think helps the ecosystem overall and gets them to a stage where it's de-risked.
And you do provide direct investment into the startup, correct?
Yeah, so as part of the TAQADAM program, we do provide up to $140,000 in non-equity, non-dilutive funding. So it's a grant model right now. 40K in the beginning of the program and 100K follow-on. So 40K for up to 60 companies, 100K for the top 10 companies. And we don't even select the top 10. So we bring all the investors in the community to actually select who they think is most promising. And several of which are in the room with us here in the audience, who are far nicer and more well-versed in terms of selecting the startups. After we've spent 6 months with them, we'll be biased and won't be able to make an impartial decision.
That's great. We're going to get back to that. Dr. Mohab, you are very well-versed in technology. You're published researcher, you've got a couple of patents, and you've worked in a university environment. You know, you're currently a professor at AUC, American University of Cairo, and you're also CEO of INNOVETY, which is a company that helps organizations build their innovation capability. By the way, this is also what I do. Part of my job is we have a company called Human Engineering Advisory. We help, you know, we're innovation architects. How do we embed innovation into the DNA? So I would love to hear your perspective from your experience on incubators, and perhaps also shed some light on this notion, you know, in a university, that's where research happens. In our area of the world, I mean, KAUST not included, because I know you have a heavy research budget, but most universities don't have research. Can you shed some light on that, please?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So let me just say that addressing your question directly about the kind of commonalities that can exist between university incubators and corporate incubators, most of them, they actually start from understanding what they want to achieve as an organization at the very beginning, defining what kind of strengths that they have internally. So for example, the kind of work that we did at the American University in Cairo, University of St. Joseph in Lebanon, and other universities is that we look internally into their internal strengths, like what kind of technologies, what kind of projects, what kind of research that they are very, very strong in, and effectively look at the kind of market opportunity that can be created from these different projects and research and technologies. So we effectively do what we call a research management phase to see the kind of potential that can come out of these different projects from the university. And then we do an evaluation of the technology, making sure that it has unique values. We do a market evaluation, and then finally identify where you can actually commercialize the kind of technologies, and you decide after that to incubate that. And commercialization at universities, if I can just highlight this part, can actually take one of two directions. One of these directions is usually not thought of in a proper way. So commercialization can either take the form of establishing a startup, or it can actually take the form of developing technology that can be sold and licensed to industry. And that's really the big difference here between usually incubators at universities and universities in the corporate world. The part related to selling and licensing technology coming out of universities that get incubated, this is usually, people don't really think about that a lot. And there's a lot of opportunity that for universities to establish this very well. And you would actually be surprised that, you know, from when you look at university students and that are very strong technically, if they are given the very simple tools, support, like things like university incubators, they can actually flourish very, very well, and they can actually develop a very solid business case around the kind of research and technology that they develop. So it goes back again, looking at the internal strengths of what you have as a university, what we call like an internal mapping, effectively. And that's the kind of similarity that we also see with corporate incubators too, is that it always starts by looking at what you want to, what kind of strengths you have as an incubator, as a company, developing something called an innovation strategy, which is to see what kind of technologies you have, how can you leverage them, and to ask yourself a very simple question. The kind of startups that I want to be able to incubate as a corporate, do I want them to help me with something related to my process, some kind of enabling technology, or is it a startup that I want to incubate that can perhaps allow me to go into new areas, new markets altogether? So these kind of decisions, they usually happen at the very beginning for both organizations. And I'll be happy again to share more on that, but I'll give an opportunity to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Mohab. Hadi, Saudi Aramco established a business incubator in 2011 called WAD. You are currently manager of that incubator. Could you, with the background question, the earlier question in mind, but could you focus a bit on what's the purpose really of Saudi Aramco establishing an incubator such as WAD, and what would you say has been the successes, ROI, you know, how do you create value? How does WAD create value for Saudi Aramco?
Thank you for having me, and a pleasure to be here. First, Aramco established WAD as an entrepreneurship center. WAD has a VC arm of $200 million. And just to recap to what Mohab was mentioning, it's always there is a purpose or a goal for establishing incubator. So all VCs always having a problem with the deal flow. So they look for certain startups, there's market trends that they have to look into. So the purpose of establishing the incubator is basically to have a pipeline for potential investments. And usually when you, as Abdulrahman was mentioning, so we all have a common goal, which is GDP contribution and basically economical empowerment for the kingdom. So the program itself basically brings early stage startups with an MVP that has potential for investment. So the purpose of creating the incubator itself, to have startups ready for investments. We run 2 cohorts a year, one around the summertime and the other one by the end of the year. And we try to do our best to work with the startups with an MVP to help them to gain traction and have product market fit so they become attractive to VCs. So I'll give you an example for one startup that we have. We incubate 2019. We provide them with a space, with a grant, and a couple of shared services and support. Now they're able to raise Series A. So that's just an example of what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hadi. So I'm interested and I think the audience would be interested as well. I mean, it's not that we have a shortage of incubators. Actually, incubators are popping up left and right. People don't know what to do, they set up an incubator, I guess. But most are not delivering, right? You know, and I would say, at least in the case of Jordan, the university incubators have a role to play. They are providing training, exposure to that entrepreneurial path. But as an output of startups that are investable, that's very low. At the core, at HTU, it's a tech incubator that we run, and we built and now are currently running. We're very focused on investability. Our end game is light at the end of the tunnel, money in the bank, whether it's a grant or equity investment. And what would you say, maybe I'll ask this to Mohab, Dr. Mohab, what would you say is missing in the current models of incubation? They come in, they're paired with a mentor, and then training, and I would say that probably 80% of the training is unnecessary. And people are already burnt out. I mean, if they're a good entrepreneur, they've already been in 3 programs. They've probably seen the same facilitator. So what do you feel is missing? And again, if anybody has any follow-up on that, please go ahead. Elie, Hadi, Abdulrahman. So, Mohab.
Okay. So I'll mention 2 things, maybe 3. One hindrance sometimes we see when it comes to universities trying to establish these kind of incubators and to be able to commercialize the research that they have is their IP policy, the intellectual property policy of the university. Some universities don't have a policy, and sometimes we come to a point where there is a contingency or a contention between the founders of these technologies or the owners of these technologies, which are researchers and students, and between the university. And that is a point where it can actually create a big obstacle to take things forward. So one of them is the IP policy of universities, which should be well known and well established and well documented. The second thing is to have a good management of these incubators and good management of these technology transfer offices. Some of these people have to have very strong business mindset when it comes to be able to link between research and startups, research-based startups and the outside world. They have to have that knowledge. This is not an easy skill to have both sides. And so the part that has to do with the market linkages and understanding the business component is this is another hindrance that we're seeing, again the linkage with the market. So the management itself of these university incubators has to be well set out. Those are 2 things, and the other thing of course is that a lot of the universities they don't know how to do proper research management in the first place, which is when you talk about students and researchers at universities, okay, some of them they do research because their professors tells them we want to publish papers where these are the kind of grants that we're getting from a certain donor, but they don't really predict from the very beginning what kind of commercial or market value is this research establishing. So this has to be established at the very beginning, and then after that having the appropriate tools, as I mentioned to you, to take this forward. So those are the 2-3 things that I see.
Great. Elie, you have something
yeah. So I'd like to point out that for corporates, and Hadi mentioned it, from a deal flow point of view, they look at incubators as at least, at one point as deal flow. There are many corporate incubators that are social impact and CSR driven, especially at a local community or a local economy. But ultimately, incubators are deal flow that are necessary, especially because corporates invest strategically. They are not investing for financial returns. Yeah. Of course, the startup has to be financially viable and has a business model that potentially will return the investment, but they invest in it strategically because it fits their mandate to expand into a new market, into a new product line, into innovating in emerging markets. So they bring external innovation in as after they do gap analysis to really take that into new levels. And intellectual property here could play a big role, or the team, the expertise that they bring in, or because the upside is really that big. So they look at their incubator as a deal flow, but having to focus only on their incubator is to a certain extent bias, because you end up selecting startups that fit a very narrow profile that fits your need. But there could be a lot of incubators out there that should be considered, come from universities or even third-party incubators like, in the US, the Y Combinator. And the third element of deal flow is purely passive relationships, right? Events like this are actually, a good source of corporate, sourcing of deal flow. So they play a role. But that role has to really help the future strategy of the corporations. And why, for example, university incubators are important because of the IP and the research that comes with it, and the fact that, the due diligence is that much easier.
Yeah. A follow-up with you, Elie, with regards to, IP does not mean commercializable.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
You can have a patent, and 70% of patents are not usable. So, what would be a strategy to have a healthy coupling between the tech conversation and the business conversation? Because usually in universities, it's like all tech, we're going to change the world with this new method, and they are completely disconnected. They don't even know who they would sell it to. And sometimes we get startups and they're like, oh yeah, we need to IP this. I'm like, are you crazy? You want to put like $35,000 and be Al-Hadi, and then, let's say somebody copied it. What, you're going to go sue them? Can you go to court? So we say, listen, create value. Don't worry about being copied.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? And again, the panel, if you have any additions on that conversation.
So as we know, the law of survivability in startup and probability of success applies everywhere. Same thing, 80, 10, and then 2% ultimately. And so, even startups that are heavily incubated and promoted, they follow the same rule, because execution is everything after a while. So, you could be very well equipped, you have the best intention, you have the best money, and you execute the wrong way, and then as a result, things happen. So corporates play a role in terms, they could be a customer to the incubated companies. They could be a channel. They don't have to really buy them or integrate them. They could be a channel to resell their product on a global level. And they could use them internally. But ultimately, they will look at it that, is this an investable company that ultimately I can acquire and integrate and turn it into a core business? And a good percentage of the companies that corporates actually end up incubating or working with, startups, end up being non-investable. So if a corporate actually is working with a startup, or they put some scouting money in, like a few $100,000, it could very well lead into a dead end and go nowhere. So the actual process of elimination and the process of qualification continues all the way to when that contract is signed, sealed, and delivered, and the execution follow.
Great.
Can I
Abdulrahman.
step in just a little bit? So two things. We spoke about why some incubators might not work out, why some university accelerators might not work out. Usually people aren't realistic, right? They want, and I've had these conversations, like, oh, you want to set up an entrepreneurship center, an accelerator. Why? Is it for student learning and teaching? Is it for financial expectations? Is it for commercialization? And the answer is usually yes. And it's hard to optimize for all of the above, right? We need to be realistic of what we're going to achieve. If this is something that's in service of the student pool or the university community, then it's not going to have the same financial returns as something that is able to cross-pollinate with the entire ecosystem, Let's just be realistic about that. If the purpose is economic development and you want to attract all these kind of different startups, then you're going to design it that way. We don't have these honest conversations early on. As a result, the accelerator or incubator is designed in a cookie cutter approach. Oh, this is how I've seen most accelerator programs structured. Therefore, we will copy the same thing, and that's probably the right one. It doesn't work. And we need to be a little bit more courageous and willing to take it long term. If a lot of people will spin up a program and then shut it down shortly after. We've been at this for over a decade. We've designed 3 different iterations of the accelerator program at many different points in time. What worked in 2015 doesn't work now. And we have to be honest. And we've made enough mistakes that we kind of know what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And we're still making mistakes and happily learning from that and adjusting as time goes on. So I think the biggest thing is figuring out, why is the program designed the way it is? Does it enhance the one single thing that you optimize for? And everything else that happens is great. It's an additional benefit, and we focus on that.
A positive byproduct, let's say. Great. One question that comes to mind is where's the innovation in the models of incubation acceleration? They haven't changed. The content is static for the most part. So, Hadi, what's your perspective on that with WAD? Could you highlight a little bit? What are the differentiators of your programming as such?
So, Abdulrahman raised a good point. They need to have the honest conversation. So a lot of incubators, they're literally co-working spaces, and a lot of them basically they have a sponsor or investor. Basically, their main purpose to fill this space, whether it's good startup, not good startups. That's the main purpose for them. In our case, our definition is clear. We need to have a pipeline for our VC. So let's say I will talk about the last batch we have. We've received 255 applications. We accepted 13. So
زي هارفارد يعني. زي هارفارد acceptance.
So so I don't care if the space that I have is full or empty. I care about the startups are getting investments.
Quality, yes.
So as I mentioned, just maybe you weren't with me in this, but most of the incubators are operating as co-working space with the model, let's fill this space. So this is what we do different. And we have a high number of startups that have been receiving investments is quite good.
Fantastic. So being mindful of time, we started late. Our timer here is counting down from 10 seconds to 0. However, they gave us 28 minutes, and this was scheduled for 50. So we're going to go a bit more because we barely spoke. But maybe we can be kind of faster, and then please formulate your questions for the audience. You want to dismiss it?
Can I say something, Yazan, about something that you
mentioned? Please, go ahead.
Yeah, just because you were making this comment about whether patents are, you establish patents and then you look at the commercial value. You do not protect any kind of technology and then you start looking at what kind of market value you get out of it. You have to actually do the market evaluation first, and then you decide whether you want to pay thousands of dollars of actually protecting your technology or not. Okay? You can always do a provisional patent, which costs like $500 for like a year, but during which you can do but you have to do the market evaluation first. It's really important.
And it's helpful to have expertise that can tell you what is the combination of defense options that you should use. Should this be a patent, a trade secret? Should you have a combination of both? There's many different elements you can use to make sure that your business is hard to replicate.
Fantastic. So I would like to go back to Elie, because Elie has a vast experience in VCs. He's doing corporate ventures in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, and he's quite familiar with, what in your view over, your experience has changed in the dynamics of VCs within this region. And what do you feel needs to change? If you have a magic wand and you can change one thing that would create that impact, what would that be in the ecosystem or in people's thinking mindset, whatever it is? So what are your perspectives on this area of the world, and what do you feel has changed and needs to change?
I wish I have a magic wand. That would be like
yeah,
the
we
first
all do.
one. Just so when I formed my first fund in the region here in 2009, that was the good news. I got a lot of funding almost instantly, and you know, that was a big moment. And I moved from the Silicon Valley actually to the region to invest the money, but we couldn't find startups. There was no deal flow. And that was the first realization that, oh, we're too early. But what we ended up doing is spending a lot of time in market development and explaining and understanding and bootstrapping and going to universities, you know, and working with incubators and so on to create the deal flow. So at the time, the deal flow was the issue. And the ecosystem didn't exist. We couldn't find a lawyer that understand the term sheet. And when we go to the bank to open a bank account, you know, that was like, oh, you're bringing a big check here. You have to fill all kind of documentation. So the system was not there. Well, fast forward now, obviously, you know, you look around, it's a very vibrant innovation economy now in the region. Governments are changing a lot of the friction, removing and enabling entrepreneurship, social impact, job creation, investing. We have, I think at the time, in 2009, there were 2 funds, maybe 3. Now, I lost count how many, maybe hundreds of funds across the region. And so clearly that cycle has taken off, and that's very exciting. So what's missing? Exits. So at the time, you know, people will tell me, if I'm going to give you $1 million to your fund, how am I going to get it back? If you're not going to give it back, I'm going to go buy an apartment and sell it, or a building and do real estate. Fair. Well, I will tell them, first we have an issue of deal flow, and exits will not happen until years from now. So we'll worry about it then. Well, then is now. And now many of the funds that are investing, they are going back for a second round and a third round, or attracting international investors. And the question is, show me your track record. And the track record doesn't mean how you deploy the money. The track record now is, how did you invest in companies that have realized their objectives and are now, in a way, in a state of exit, or you have sold and returned money to the LPs. Now, if the LP is a social impact LP, you don't have to worry about it. You created jobs and so on. But if the LP is a financial institution with return expectation, then you have a problem. And so that is the next thing that need to really start take place. And corporates, there are a few exit mechanism. One is IPO in the local public market, or international market, or SPAC, like what Anghami did, or corporates. Corporates worldwide are the biggest, you know, liquidity initiator. They are the one that actually create exits. And this is why I think the next maturity cycle here in the region is for corporates, local corporates, because we keep talking about international corporates expanding to the market and buying a local player, fine. But that's a small sliver. Local corporations, the big corporations, the ARAMCOs, the STC.
They need to get into the game.
They need to get into the game. And so the first step is getting incubators and participation and all this stuff. But ultimately, they have to buy companies. It has to be part of the cultural evolution of the entrepreneurship, so that there is a serial entrepreneurship. There are serial entrepreneurs. There are funds with returns. There is a level of excitement. And yes, there is wealth creation here. Yeah, I mean, this is one
Fantastic.
of the things that is really important about VC, why VC started in the first place. Yes, there is a change the world, make an impact, but ultimately it's wealth creation.
Yeah, I'd like to quickly turn to the audience. If you have any questions, and please, just your name, your affiliation, no opinions, just a question that you have for the committee would be great. Maybe the questions will not be answered fully on stage because we're tight in time, but it's an opportunity to hear your thoughts. Please go ahead.
Thank you guys. Amazing conversation. Marwan Al-Sakha from Aljiffry. So you guys reviewed hundreds of applications for startups. What are red flags? Audience is there.
So what are red flags for startups?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Can we get the next question and we can just have 3 questions? And عاد انت كنت أول واحد بس.
Mr. Elie, my question is, what's your take on impact investment in the region? That's one thing. And long-term IRR and ROI for the fund and the LPs, because we tend to see a lot of investors looking for the 3 to 5 years kind of ROI and IRR. So what's your take on impact investment and R&D based startups?
Okay, so impact investment and IRR on the long term. And last question.
My question is for incubators to accept startups. What are the top 3 factors you guys look at, and how much weight do you give for each factor? Sorry, should I repeat the question?
It's okay.
No, no,
It's okay.
you know, my comprehension does not change depending on.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm going to challenge the committee here with 30-second answers just as a starter because I'm pressured.
I'll do you better. I think I can do 15 seconds.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
So we don't even look at 5 factors. We look at 3. Product, market, team. And the little hidden one that's called fit that we talked a little bit about. Red flags, especially for university and corporate, if they think we're going to build their product for them, that's always the biggest thing. Like, oh, you guys have a lot of researchers and labs. Surely they can build my product for me. And can you find me 2 co-founders also? So that tends to be a scary one. And impact investing. You didn't ask me. I'm hurt. But I think the term impact has been a little bit nebulous, and I think focusing on specific things like climate will help clarify the conversation.
Fantastic.
I totally agree with that, what you just mentioned. Team is also very, very important, being very resilient and flexible in terms of changing the business model, especially in the days that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we don't look at red flag up front. We look at the value proposition and the market fit, the product, and so on. But one red flag for us and for me is that can the team execute, right? Can this team execute? And we have 5 minutes sometime to figure this one out, but because we have listened to thousands of pitches, we have a gut feel. But then if the team cannot execute, but they have the potential of executing, the next question is, can they listen? Can they be mentored?
Are they coachable?
Are they coachable? Because if you go on a defensive while we're asking you question and you don't listen, but you try to portray and press your opinion forward, then we take a step back and you're probably 90% out of the door. That's it. You're gone.
Fantastic.
As the 3 gentlemen mentioned, team. Okay. The product can be fixed if you have a good team. The pivot can happen in a business model if you have a good team. And if they're passionate enough, they will move the startup and they will scale its growth quickly. So, team.
Fantastic. We would love to go for more, but I negotiated 10 minutes and I'm exactly the 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Hadi, Elie, Mohab, Abdulrahman. It's a pleasure. Please consider this as a conversation starter rather than خلصنا. So please seek us out after the panel, and thank you for your lovely questions, and please engage. Thank you very much.